r/ProRevenge.
Micromanager got what was coming to him. First published in r/malicious compliance, but was told y'all might like this as well. Some years ago I worked at a logistics facility and leadership had a way of adding workload to middle management. Rarely did any of them last more than 3 years before they either got disillusioned or changed jobs somehow. After working the floor there for 2 years I was promoted to a team leader, and after 3 years as team leader I became shift leader, managing a shift of about 60 workers. We did pretty well. No other shift at this or other facilities could match our KPIs, and we did a lot of cross-training and on-the-fly adapting to the ever-changing needs of the company, current orders and workflow. I found the work to be interesting and challenging until I got a new manager who bent towards micromanaging. It didn't take long before he wanted me to write a detailed log of how I spent my days, hours and 1/4 hours. I told him this was a really bad idea, but if he wanted this, I would of course comply. The first week I accounted for every 30 minutes with a line or two, thinking this was enough of a waste of time. But I was soon informed of my mistake. New boss wanted more details and every 15 minutes accounted for. Again I told him this wasn't smart, but I got overruled. The next week I made sure to write 4 or 5 lines for every 15 minutes of the workday, like writing down the names of the works who took the early lunch, and who took the later lunch. I wrote the same lines for every 15 minutes if the task took more than 15 minutes and so on. To his credit, he actually followed up on a few things the first 3 weeks. And if he had kept doing that, I wouldn't have complained much. But, of course, he gave up after a couple of weeks. I noticed this when I made a reference to one of the follow-ups and how we had failed that specific metric, for a good reason, but never heard anything from him. So from then on I suspected he had stopped reading my logs. Cue malicious compliance. After keeping the logs honest for a few weeks more I felt secure that he never read them. I started adding a few tidbits of my own making. At first it was a line telling him that if he used a certain phrase when talking to me the next week, I'd buy him a soda. He never used any of the phrases and thus never got free stuff. An example of a phrase could be pineapples are best served hot or apples are sweeter than oranges, general statements, but unlikely to pop up randomly in conversations. Boss still claimed he read every single one of my reports and ridiculed me for claiming it was a bad idea. As the weeks went on without having to pay up, my malicious compliance kept getting bigger and bigger. Eventually I promised him $100 in cash if he would talk to me about a specific picking location in our facility during the next week. He didn't, but of course I also started writing many relevant things into the logs, like questions for him on how to solve potential problem, telling him he needed to start planning for vacations well in advance of the holidays and such. Still no response in any way, shape or form. If he really did read them, why not use them to get questions and potential problems on the record? So after a year of writing logs that were never read and hadn't been opened since I saved them in the assigned folder, our great leader got himself into some trouble and tried to shift the blame onto his underlings. We didn't appreciate that. Especially when the cause of the trouble was written in clear text in these logs from the very first moment we discovered there might be a problem, all the way up to where it was an ongoing hindrance that cost us more and more time and money every week. Eventually a big meeting was called with all us foremen, team leads, shift leads and middle managers, with several big brass observing our boss trying to fix the situation. Whenever he went for one of my people, I stood up for them and told them I took the responsibility for the entire shift. There was no need for him to call out my people, because I was there, and it was my responsibility. A gleam in his eye told me he was about to make me the scapegoat, and I sat there calmly while he tore me a new one. He didn't hold back and really gave me his all to such an extent that several of the big brass started stirring uncomfortably. They could probably sense he was overplaying his hand. After the tirade petered out or he had run out of steam, I asked him if he was done. And if he was done, if I could reply? He agreed and leaned back in his chair, confident in his character assassination of me. I took out my laptop, connected it to the big screen so that everyone could see, and opened the folder where my logs were saved. I pointed out that they hadn't been opened in a while and that track changes had been activated and no changes had been logged by his user. My user was the only one that had made the logs, edited them and saved them. I then went on describing the log entries where the problem was discovered, How we tracked its development and maturation into the big problem it was today. One of the best moments was when I could show everyone that we had in fact suggested several solutions to the problem many times. I had also logged that we had several meetings discussing the problem, its causes and probable solutions, sometimes even directly asking my manager what he thought about them. There were logs that showed we had told him about this problem many times, in many ways, but no logs of any solutions or response from him. I was so focused on the presentation I didn't really look at my boss, but when I was done, I glanced up at him and I can safely say I've never seen a face more angry than his. He was furious. But of course his boss and his boss's boss was there, right next to him, so he couldn't do much. His boss asked him if he had anything to say for himself, but he didn't really. He claimed I had edited them later and filled in details not known at the time of writing, but he was obviously reaching for anything to save himself. One of the big brass asked about a phrase he had seen. "What's so special about picking location /?" I told them all about my little joke and how my boss had missed getting tens of free sodas and probably $400 if he had merely said the magic words each week. Amidst general laughter, I was told to leave the meeting along with anybody my pay grade or lower. 3 hours later, some security guy emptied his office of his personal belongings, and 2 weeks later a new boss arrived from another facility. It took him 3 days to ask about pineapples and other apples, and he had made sure that there was nothing wrong with the aforementioned picking location. He also told me to keep the logs more general and only a few lines for each day, but to also mention things of operative importance directly to him. Newest boss and me had a great real-time ship where he left me and my shift mostly alone, and we kept topping out KPIs for the rest of my time in that company. Micromanager boss that was fired eventually found a new job at a lower level at another company, but only lasted about a year. 5 years later I saw him selling used cars in a neighboring town. Life hadn't treated him well.
A response to the post.
Pineapples are best served hot. Where's my money up?
OP's response to this comment.
Nice try. The phrases had to be used the week after each log was written. No soup for you.
A response to the post.
Oh, the things that don't get read. My boss removed his company ID at my station and left it there for a while, walking away. As a joke, I used white tape and a typewriter to type the word Tootsie, trimmed it for his badge and covered up his first name with it. I thought he'd notice it immediately, but no. He wore that badge for a week, in a dozen meetings before someone asked him if Tootsie was really his first name.
A response to this comment.
To be fair, if it was my badge, I probably wouldn't have noticed either.